All right, here's a story to keep your eye on. As members of the U.S. Senate debate the SAVE Act, state leaders are highlighting how the controversial voting bill would impact elections here in Connecticut.
Your reporter Roger Suzanen is live right now at the state capitol to break down everything that we need to know about this. So, Roger, this could lead to some pretty big changes.
Yeah, good morning, ladies. And you're absolutely right about that. In fact, maybe the one thing that folks on both sides of this debate agree on is that the SAVE Act would really alter election days across the country, including, of course, here in Connecticut. The question, though, that lawmakers are weighing right now is whether that impact would be positive or negative. So let's highlight three things that you really should know about the SAVE Act and, again, its potential impact here in Connecticut and beyond. Probably the biggest alteration is that the bill would change the documents that you need to bring to the polls. The SAVE Act would require that voters bring an ID that proves they are a U.S. citizen, something like a real ID driver's license or a passport. Now, right now, Connecticut's voting laws are much more flexible about IDs, and you can even cast a provisional ballot without one if you sign an affidavit. But another thing you should know is that the battle lines are really being drawn here. Supporters claim the bill is all about enhancing voter election integrity, but critics argue non-citizens rarely vote in elections, and the SAVE Act actually creates more problems than it solves, including increased paperwork for town leaders leading up to elections there. There's also sparring over how the bill would impact women. Critics argue women who change their names after getting married would have to take unnecessary additional steps just to vote, but supporters argue that states can take steps to prevent that. So obviously there's a whole lot that goes into this bill. And this afternoon at 12:45, the Secretary of the State, Stephanie Thomas, says she's going to explain other ways that the SAVE Act would impact Connecticut and across the country on Election Day. Of course, we'll share that update with you as it happens again at 12:45. Reporting live outside the state capitol, I'm your reporter Roger Suzanen, Channel 3 Eyewitness News.
All right, Roger, thank you.